All right. Rebecca, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. So, folks, as you're now noticing, Rebecca Bibliotheca will be my co-host tonight. We are on episode 199. We are one shy of good old golden 200. This is Mormonism Live, Mormon Mommy Homemaker, and RFM is a touch under the weather tonight. So we have Rebecca Bibliotheca, also who co-hosts with us on the Mormon Newscast, filling in tonight. And I think in some ways, and RFM agreed, this will help the show because you've got a lot of history with the topic tonight affecting you personally. And so I wanted to give you a moment. Almost everybody listening to this show is going to know who you are. But Rebecca, maybe take a moment just to introduce yourself to the audience and let people know where they can find you. And then we'll jump into the show tonight.
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. And thanks for inviting me on. I always love to hang
You're
out with
welcome.
you guys. So I'm Rebecca Bibliotheca. I started the Good Book Club, which is a virtual reading group for post and nuanced Mormons. And we've been going for 5 years. That kind of morphed into my own podcast because I just can't talk enough, right? So we have Mormonish podcast with my co-host Landon, and we put episodes out on Tuesdays and Fridays. It's really fun. Have a lot of fun guests, including people like Bill. And then a while ago, back in January, I was invited onto the Mormon Newscast with RFM and Bill and sometimes John DeLynn. And that's a wonderful experience and opportunity. And I love to co-host with everybody because I just admire and really appreciate everybody in this space.
Awesome. Excellent. We'll jump into the show. I was going to do a little bit. You can't see it behind me. I don't know if anybody ever used this Huel powder. I'm trying to lose weight. I was up at like 217 pounds and I'm down to 202. And every day for lunch, I eat this stuff, but they make it in a lot of flavors. And the one was atrocious. And I was going to just shit on their company, excuse my language, shit on their company for a moment because the flavor is just horrible. But I paid for them, so I wanted to choke them down. And but we'll just skip that. That's not going to make much for much fun. But let's go into.
Which flavor didn't you like? Because my boys did this forever. The Huel to get in shape. What did you like?
The two main flavors are just the chocolate and vanilla.
Right.
The chocolate was like tolerable. The vanilla to me was atrocious. So what I ended up doing, and it's actually how I've lost the weight, is I take the chocolate powder, mix it with some almond milk, put in some frozen sliced up bananas, some frozen blueberries, a little bit of granola, and I eat that for one of my meals each day. I have coffee for breakfast, Huel for lunch, the Huel granola, banana, blueberry mixture, and then I eat whatever the hell I want for dinner, and sometimes that runs into the evening quite late. So but it's worked out quite well. So for those folks at Huel, somebody called it Hurl powder. That's probably better. Don't get the vanilla. It's really atrocious. If you're going to get something there, I wrote the company and the company messaged me back and said, we're really sorry about your experience. We will send you a new bag. What flavor would you like? And I said, well, I paid for the chocolate. It's a bigger bag for less money. But if you don't care, I'll take the chocolate mint. And he's like, I'll send you chocolate mint. So I will return and report like a good Mormon and let folks know how the chocolate mint was. But there's that. Tonight, folks, wrong thing. Mormon Mommy Homemaker. And I want to start off with some ground rules for this episode. So number one, this episode takes the position that decisions a man, a woman, a couple make about or around such things is their business. And there is honor and appreciation from me. And I'll give you a chance, Rebecca, to say whether you agree or not. You're welcome to disagree if you want to. There is honor and appreciation for any parent of kids who adds a net benefit to their family situation. Whether you're an at-home dad, you're an at-home mom, whether you're a working mom or a working dad, you figure out what's best for your situation. And you're not going to have me adding any shame or guilt to that. So number two, this episode has no desire to see at-home mothers in any negative light. At-home mothers make an incredible difference in the world. Number three, this episode has no desire to shame or blame or guilt women who chose to work outside the home. No two humans are alike, and what a person needs to feel safe and secure and content in life will differ from person to person. I have women in my life, and I might share a story or two, but I have women in my life who I admire greatly. They are no longer in Mormonism, but they were at one time, and they were miserable and they resented it like hell that they were forced to be a round peg into a square hole and to be an at-home mom. And they deeply felt like they were called to other things, but they gave up their dreams in order to be an at-home mom. And again, no knock on at-home moms. My mom was an at-home mom for a significant portion of my childhood, and I'm very appreciative of what she did during that time of my life. So I have no knock on either group. Number 4, rather, this episode is attempting to document what the church has claimed as its teachings and as doctrine, and how prevalently they taught such a thing, and to help us all sit with what their instruction was intended to mean, and whether current leaders are attempting to move away from such teachings. Anything you want to say about those 4 kind of ground rules for tonight's conversation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good list. I think that sets us up for a really just good discussion. I would say your number 1, we take the position that decisions a man, a woman, a couple make around these things is their business. And that's something I'd like to focus on because, I mean, I was a teenager in the 70s and a young woman in the 80s. So all of this rhetoric that we're going to go through informed every single decision I made, from, dating to career choice, major in college, to whether or not to work or not after I got married. And as you say, there's nobody else belongs in that business, a decision between a couple or even a person. And when you're in a high demand, high control religion, there is someone else in your business as a couple or a person. And that's something that's in your brain that you're thinking that's informing your decision. So I think we'll get more into that. And that would be the rhetoric and the things that we're going to go through.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so the reason for this episode, I think, can be summed up in BYU. I think this is a BYU newspaper, the Daily Universe. And it's an article titled LDS Mothers Balance Career Aspirations with Divine Calling of Motherhood. And this was back in, I think, April of 2016. It says the anomaly of the working mother. And this is what the article and the person they're quoting, this is the sentiment. Although the church emphasizes education and personal growth for all and does not have official doctrine on whether women should work once they have children, LDS culture has long emphasized the mother's place in the home. Then Jennifer Long says, it's interesting because when I look back and I think, why was it that I feel I was taught this message of, oh, you need to be a stay-at-home mom? I don't remember it being explicitly taught. Hopefully, somebody knows Jennifer Long and they can point her to this podcast, because we will lay out succinctly all the moments it was explicitly taught. She goes on and says, or actually it just mentions she's a working mother from Texas who's currently a primary breadwinner in her family. Quote, but I think it was just kind of the accumulation of probably hearing those things in lessons and hearing those things in general conference, unquote. And this is where I start to get pissed right at the beginning, Rebecca, because what men who claim to be prophets, seers, and revelators, who teach us that general conference is part of our canon for the next 6 months, and they tell us that whatever they say in conference has been prayed over, it's inspired, it's been fact-checked by the correlation department, the folks who make sure that the talk is saying approved things. These are the people, prophets, seers, and revelators, who wrote and read and gave the talks in general conference. And here's Jennifer Long going like, things said in conference don't really matter. And we'll get into it tonight. It's not just general conference where things are said, but your thoughts on how believing Mormons in the modern moment seem to have such an easy time dismissing past teachings said over and over and over again from the very pulpit and general conference as not being binding on them as doctrine. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think they didn't live through the era where those things were being said. And the message was that all the time, over and over, not just from the pulpit or stories that you would read in the then called Ensign magazine, or the pictures on the cover where it was obviously a stay-at-home mom making cookies, or your young women activities when the boys were out on high adventure, you were making wedding dresses or writing in your journal about what kind of boy you'd want, or learning how to baby tend, or getting assignments to babysit. It was just in the air. It's just what it was in that particular era. And it is very different now. And so I do hear people that are younger than I am, which there are quite a few, who say, oh, I don't know that we taught that, right? And, it's hard unless you go through the canon, right, of everything that was said to explain why we all got that message. But we definitely got it loud and clear. And we especially got it, those of us that are of a similar age to me, when ERA was a big deal. And the church came down so hard on any women that showed any kind of support. That was a huge deal in the late 70s. And it definitely drove home that message to all of us. This is not what you do. You do not support these women that want to work outside the home, and you certainly don't do it yourself.
Yeah. And I want to say Mormonism is in a unique position. If the Methodist Church said something different today, and I don't know how far along the Methodist Church is, and maybe I'm speaking generally in their specific factions of it, but if they decide tomorrow to allow gay and lesbian men and women to serve as ministers in the faith, for instance, it's easy for Methodism to look back and go, hey, we messed up. We were wrong in the past. Mormonism is in a unique position because it claims it is led by prophets, seers, and revelators who get revelation from the living God, that the living God is eternal, consistent, never changing, that the gospel is the same today, tomorrow, and forever, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, or today and forever, whatever. And Mormonism makes this argument all the time that these guys are the guys you should trust to teach the truth, to see around corners. If Mormonism does something different in the modern moment that runs counter to what it did in the past, it has to be accountable to its claims about what the top 15 men are. And I think we're moving, by the way, to a place where a couple hundred years from now, the average believing Mormon will see prophet as just a religious title of a man who's in charge of this church, but who does not claim, or they don't perceive him to be receiving revelation for the world. But that's what Mormonism claimed about itself. It claimed that this is the prophet upon the earth, whether the rest of the world recognizes him or not. He's the guy, and the other 14 around him, these are the guys who get the truth straight from God and give it to us uncorrupted. And as with everything else in Mormonism, everything about this issue was said one way, and you're beginning to see that changes, that's changed. So I want to sort of set up this conversation so that we're all clear. Again, doctrine is a messy word. We all know that. There's a quote out there from Elder Oaks who says it's impossible to tell the difference between doctrine and policy when you're a church led by a prophet and who receives revelation. In other words, things are always able to change. But that's what one guy says, and what other people in the church say is no. Our doctrine, Elder Anderson here, for instance, says a few question their faith when they find a statement made by a church leader decades ago that seems incongruent with our doctrine. And we'll play it from him because I love his voice. There is an important principle that governs the doctrine of the church. The doctrine is taught by all 15 members of the first presidency and quorum of the 12. It is not hidden in an obscure paragraph of one talk. True principles are taught frequently and by many. Our doctrine is not hard to find. And so here's him saying this. So I'm going to repeat it again, but with him giving the words.
A few question their faith when they find a statement made by a church leader decades ago that seems incongruent with our doctrine. There's an important principle that governs the doctrine of the church. The doctrine is taught by all 15 members of the first presidency and quorum of the 12. It is not hidden in an obscure paragraph of one talk. True principles are taught frequently and by many. Our doctrine is not difficult to find.
So our doctrine is not difficult to find. And then you could make the argument that, well, he only taught that on one occasion. No one else has said that. Well, that's not exactly true. He actually, years later, I think in 2020 perhaps, or 2023, somewhere around there, he says the same thing again. And here is that one.
The doctrine in the scriptures and taught by the prophets includes the principles of multiple witnesses, a principle you've heard often in General Conference and one I shared more than 10 years ago. A few question their faith when they find a statement made by a church leader decades ago that seems incongruent with our doctrine. There's an important principle that governs the doctrine of the church. The doctrine is taught by all 15 members of the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12. It is not hidden in an obscure paragraph of one talk. True principles are taught frequently and by many. Our doctrine is not difficult to find.
So we've established that according to a Mormon prophet, seer, and revelator, Neil Anderson, on 2 occasions, doctrine isn't the hard thing to find. It's not the one quote being used by the critic. It's the things that we leaders testify of over and over and over again. And the first thing I did was I went into the General Conference repository. It's the corpus, I think is what it's called, the General Conference corpus. And I typed in Homemaker, and I just use this as an example. It's not perfect. There are other phrases or words that you're welcome to search to try to see if you can find it in other time periods. But if we type in the word Homemaker, it's not used at all in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 1900, 1910, 20, 30, 40. In 1950, the 1950s, it's used once. In the 1960s, it's used 4 times. It's all within the same talk. The 1970s, it was 7 times, and it was in like 6 talks. The 1980s, 12 times. The 1990s, 11 times. And then, boom, it hits a wall. And you and I, we were in it to win it. I know RFM joined the church, I think, in 1978. I joined the church in 1997. You were born into the covenant, Rebecca?
Yep, that's me, BIC.
And what I'm most familiar with is the Mormonism of the 1990s. And I know this teaching was prevalent to the point where not only did leaders say it often, not only did manuals say it often, we'll get into all of that here in a moment, but the members of my ward were reiterating it. They all knew that they were taught to push this agenda of, hey, everyone, women stay at home and men figure out how to work enough to make all the needs of your family get met. And what you see here is the 1980s. So it ramps up one time. And then again, really it's one time again in the 1960s. So then in the 1970s, the church starts this focus on women need to be in the home and men need to be out working. And that delineation needs to be absolutely kept. And you can see like there's the certain way the nuclear family works in like the 1950s and 1960s. We get to the 1970s and people are starting to challenge the status quo. So it makes sense that the church comes along in the 1970s and wants to squash any effort within the church for women to be working and that to be sort of seen as normal. So they put the clamp down by starting to teach that in multiple occasions. It picks up in the 1980s to 12 times. It's almost that much in the 90s. And then it's like overnight, there must have been some sort of directive in the church that this teaching needs to go away. We need to soften up and not speak about it anymore. And this is what the church always does. They get quiet for a while before they make it safe to do something different. And it seems to me, I don't remember in the 2000s hearing a lot about women need to stay at home from the church. I think members were still reiterating it because it had been hammered to them in the 80s and 90s, but the church wasn't saying much. And then in the 2010s, there are 4 occasions that Homemaker is mentioned. None of them were in this context. So again, the church seems to have overnight turned its back on this teaching, probably realized that it wasn't going to go well if they kept shaming women and guilting women. And so we'll get to the end of the slideshow and we'll see that what the modern perspective is from church leaders, and it sort of sets the environment for what's happened recently in Mormonism, where on a couple of occasions, a female leader in the church has spoke about her career while also being recognized as an honored leader in the church and getting acting as if like that was always the norm or that it was permissible. And then women at the ground level in large numbers pushing back and saying, this wasn't the Mormonism I grew up with. Shame on you people for making it seem like this was a possibility because I gave up all my dreams to do what you told me to do. Any thoughts from you on sort of you seeing this graph and its usage in the 80s and 90s being sort of when it was hyper focused on, and then sort of overnight going away?
Yeah, I like to call the whole phenomenon, where's my freaking 401k? That's what I call it as a stay-at-home mom who left the workforce. But it's interesting because I don't feel there was any need to mention being a homemaker in conference during those time periods that you showed. When I was, in the teenager in the 70s, I only knew of one working mom, and she was a divorced woman. She was a divorced mom. And so, of course, she was the only breadwinner, and she had to work, my friend's mom. But everybody else was a stay-at-home mom, sent you off to school, waiting there when you got back, which was wonderful. I feel like then you've got the 80s, you've got the 90s, and women are just naturally gravitating into the workforce. You have ERA, despite the fact that the church, really clamped down on that. I have a memory of a woman in testimony meeting. I must have been just an early teenager at that era, but she started talking about ERA, and the bishop actually stood up and said, this is not the place for that. I mean, that's really stuck with me all these decades, that he actually made her sit down when she was talking about ERA and what it meant and rights for women. And then I feel like in the 2000s, it's just kind of a wave that's happening. There's no stopping it. And then the church starts to realize, hey, double tithing. Yeah, double tithing is nice. So I don't think they're saying anything, but it is interesting because I do look at the top women leaders, they rotate in and out, but all of them, and I even about 6 months ago looked up their careers or who they were, the information about them. I think I only found one, and I'm talking about like General Relief Society, her counselors, young women, her counselors, primary, the counselors. I only found one who they listed as a homemaker, involved in volunteer projects. Everybody else was like, I'm a freelance artist. I'm a corporate lawyer. Everyone that the church props up as an example for women and girls has a career, which is interesting. And I also think it's interesting, and you and I talked about this earlier, Bill, that all of the second marriages, the Kristens and the Wendys, those are all women with careers. It doesn't seem like the woman that they told us all to be, the stay-at-home mom, lots of kids, that woman isn't necessarily celebrated in the real world, on paper, perhaps, but not in the real world as far as who they promote or who they associate with. That's just my observation.
Yeah. And I think your note about double tithing is in a church that's plateauing or losing members, in a church that seems to highly value money and wants to collect every cent it possibly can. When the data shows that the numbers are starting to go down, releasing the pressure on women to stay at home, allowing them then to work without feeling any sort of shame or guilt. So, and hence they will do that. Then, like you said, they get to collect the double tithing on that. And I think you also bring in some of the cultural things that were happening in these decades and other stuff that went on. And you can sort of sense that they're probably reacting to something. And again, after 2 decades, that reaction tended to go away. So here was the quote from the 1950s. I'll make this a little bigger. I'm just going to read the underlined red sections. Folks, you are all welcome to go back. I don't know what the name of this talk was. It was from the General Conference Corpus, but the talk title is not listed here. It is from a 1956 talk. And Delbert Stapley says, mothers, unless absolutely necessary, should not seek employment outside of the home, but rather should honorably fulfill their chief mission in life as wife, mother, and homemaker. Then in 1978, O. Leslie Stone gave a talk, Making Your Marriage Successful. And he said, the wife is the homemaker. It is her responsibility to see that a clean, orderly home is maintained. Some divorces have occurred where the wife becomes indifferent about her personal appearance or becomes a careless housekeeper, or both. I cannot stress too strongly to the sisters the importance of personal cleanliness, good appearance, and maintaining a clean, orderly home. Rebecca, your thoughts on, here is a man telling the women of the church to be a little more clean yourselves, dress a little nicer, be a little more, take a little better care of yourself. It's almost that Elder Ballard, put a little lipstick on,
Don't
sort
talk
of,
too much.
yeah, that sort of sentiment. And then he says, you might end up divorced if you guys don't keep your house clean enough.
Yeah, well, I have a story about that. Of course, I have a story about
Please.
everything. But this is the era of the book called Fascinating Womanhood. If you have not read the book or found it or read passages out of it, this is exactly the sentiment of the time. That, it has advice like, when your husband comes home, he's probably concerned by business and stress of the day. So don't you ever share any concerns with him. You need to look perfect. You need to have dinner ready. You need to keep the children at bay. He needs to have an hour of downtime to relax. Then maybe if he's in a good mood, he's had his dinner and dessert, you might approach him with, any household concerns or things, but certainly back off if he seems like he's not receptive. I mean, it's a great book. It's a great study in the era. And again, I'll say the greatest tip I learned from it was and I've said this before, was the trick of the onion. If you haven't had a chance to make dinner and your husband's in the driveway and he's going to be very upset if there's no dinner, throw an onion in the oven and turn the temperature up. It'll smell good, like something's cooking, and that'll give you a chance to very quickly whip things together. But you certainly have to always be in full makeup, look great. And they really did say you could lose your marriage, you could lose your family if you don't look the part of the perfect stay-at-home mother with all those children and also keeping up on your appearance. And I will tell a story from an extended family member. I'll be very vague about it, but she had 11 children under the age of 16. And there was a scenario in the family where the husband stepped out, if you know what I mean. And she went to the stake president and said, what am I supposed to do? There's another woman involved. And that stake president actually said, well, if you just keep yourself up a little bit more, or maybe keep the house a little cleaner, maybe this wouldn't have happened with 11 children. In the 60s, this was the sentiment. It was pretty much all on the woman. Although I think we will talk about later the incredible pressure this puts on the man to, I hate this phrase, provide and preside, right? That's also pressure.
Yeah, we'll see some of those quotes that make it so that, for instance, I worked as a floor covering salesperson for 16 years of my young adulthood. And it was week to week trying to just provide we had a really small home. Yep. We ate like fried bologna sandwiches one night and chicken nuggets the next. And, going out as a family to eat was going to get pizza. We struggled week to week. We had to really watch our budget, and Amanda had to work on the weekends, and she worked a few evenings a week. And you'll see some of these quotes later on. It really does add shame to the man too. Not that it's in comparison, because I think the shame and guilt on women was significantly more, but it did. There was at least a certain amount that did go both directions. Okay, so then we get to, and these aren't necessarily in chronological order. I tried to keep them sort of with the same moment in time. So then we get to this manual, and I sort of vaguely remember this, but not really.
The cover looks familiar, but I couldn't tell you what it was called or anything. But yeah, it does.
It looks like kind of the same design as the old Gospel Principles
Mhm.
manual. There's I forget what the other one was called, but there's one that they use outside of the United States in developing areas, sort of as their handbook of instruction for how to incorporate the gospel in areas that are growing and don't really have an established priesthood, an established sort of ward centered life going on. They've got this other book, but it has sort of that same look to it. And in this book, it says, in fact, I'll let you read this one.
Do
Sorry
you
about
want me
that.
just to read the red underlined part?
Yes, please.
Okay. It says some women spend too much time keeping their homes clean and organized. They need to learn how to spend less time on housework in order to spend more time being with their families, developing talents, and serving others. Housework is important, but it should not take away from the more important things. Having a clean home should not be our main goal. How
Now,
interesting.
I like this. I don't have a
Yeah.
problem with this. The trouble is that once you teach the other side of it, once you tell women to take care of yourselves, be cleaner, dress nicer, you might end up divorced if you don't have a good appearance and
Yeah.
maintain a clean and orderly home, and then come back and go, oh, by the way, we didn't mean that, but we're not going to tell you that we messed up before. We're just going to throw this new thing on you. So the women of the ward grew up with this past idea.
Mhm.
You know how Mormonism works. Something can be said in conference, and for the next decade or two, it will be mentioned from time to time. Everyone will be reminded of what it was they should have been doing based on some talk that was given 10 or 20 years ago even. And suddenly this other thing comes along and says, oh, we're going to say the opposite of that. And so in Mormonism, you're often damned if you do and damned if you don't. And this is one of those instances where no matter what, you're not going to get it right.
Yeah, no, that's true. And they're certainly not going to forget all of those talks on keeping a clean and orderly home. God is a God of order, right? Remember that. And the spirit can't dwell when it's a messy, unclean home. I remember all those kinds of talks. And yet now they throw on top of this, but certainly don't neglect your family or your family time or your family study. So women are just going to take that and add it on top of everything else that they've been told to do. There's no way
Yeah.
they're going to sacrifice any of it.
Yeah. This is from an ensign. I think it was 1985. I think it's maybe it says there 1975. I'll let you read this one as well. This is a letter from the first presidency to Elder Neil A. Maxwell and President Dallin H. Oaks. And then I think Elder Oaks is maybe giving the talk, but they're reading what it was that they were told by the first presidency.
Yeah, and it's in May of 1973. And it says, our young women properly aspire to and prepare themselves for the experience and blessings of motherhood, which is their highest calling. And that's all we really heard. It's the highest calling and opportunity for service. As you are aware, the leaders of our church have consistently taught that mothers who have young children in the home
They what
should devote their primary energies to the companionship and training of their children and the care of their families, and should not seek employment outside of the home unless there is no other way that the family's basic needs can be provided. That's very
Remember,
subjective, honestly.
yeah.
What is a basic need?
Elder Anderson said that doctrine are those things that are consistently taught by the entire leadership. And here is the comment that this is the thing that was consistently taught, that mothers who have young children in the home should devote their primary energies to the companionship and training of their children and the care of their families, and should not. So you could say primary energies. Well, maybe employment could be a secondary energy. Well, they nipped that in the bud with the last comment, which is they should not seek employment outside of the home. So maybe inside the home, but not outside of the home, unless there is no other way that the family's basic needs can be provided. And as you point out, we all have to sort of figure out what's our basic needs. Is having an automobile a basic need? Is having store-bought clothes, or do I need to have, does the mom now need to sew all the clothes for the kids to save a few more dollars? There's so many ways in which, and I think this happens a lot in Mormonism, where they paint with a broad brush and they leave the members to sort of second guess each other and to criticize each other and to try to figure out what it is that they're talking about.
Yeah, I think so. And it really does leave it up to interpretation. And then you add tithing on top of that. And that can become an extraordinarily stressful, bottomless pit. And again, that speaks to the husband being the primary breadwinner. If the husband is laid off or loses his job, I've gone through that. My husband was a contract recruiter. And so there were many ups and downs there's a lot of things that went on in the economy between 2000 and now. We can all probably name exactly those dips, but when there is only one primary breadwinner and somebody else maybe is trying to do little part-time things like you mentioned Amanda did something on the weekend or something at night. I would do copywriting at night so I could stay at home, but I also had a little something going on. But when the primary breadwinner is taken out, which happens to every family, the amount of stress that puts on a family and children is unbelievable. And I have to say, now my kids are all in their 20s, but looking back, I never realized this, but my making the decision influenced by what I was learning at church to stay home for a number of decades, they just remember a lot of stress. They remember a lot of really difficult times and upsetness as you try to navigate when you have the primary breadwinner out of work, you're doing things it's just, and the church doesn't. And the thing is that in my situation, I felt like going to church and looking around and feeling no one else is in my situation. It gives you this imposter syndrome as a stay-at-home mom, and everyone else was a stay-at-home mom too, but not necessarily having the struggle, or at least I didn't believe so that I was. And it just sets you really apart where, I've talked to other people who've had this scenario too, where you're just sitting there at church and inside your mind is just racing. What are we going to do? What's going to happen? We only have one breadwinner. I'm a stay-at-home mom. Do I need to go back? What about my kids? What will they do? It just puts you in this cycle where you just don't ever quite feel at peace or safe, and you feel like an imposter in your own ward. Although I know, of course, other people have struggles, but you tend to think it's only happening to me. Everyone else is fine. So, and I'm not saying that having two incomes would completely cure that, but there certainly is a safety net there, if possible. So, and again, I'm just speaking to my own personal experience, but there can be a lot of stress with the one breadwinner provide and preside kind of scenario, because that's not necessarily real world, I think, as a lot of us know.
Yep, totally. Okay, so from here, we end up, and I don't know what this is. I generally would have the cover next to it, but I was collecting images and I couldn't go back and figure out where this was from. But I know I found it on a Reddit post when I went into ex-Mormon Reddit and trying to find conversations that had occurred around this topic, because that was a quick way to start to gather some sources on the front end of my research. And that's where it came from, but I don't know what this is. It looks like sort of that gospel principles manual sort of look. But right in the middle there, it says, mother, same quote from before. By the way, we may see quotes in various places, so things might be repeated tonight. That's intentional. Anytime you hear the same quote again, it's in a different place. So anytime the church published the same quote in more than one place, it is a signal to all of us that this is the consistent beliefs, policies, doctrines, teachings of the church. So we have mothers who have young children in the home should devote their primary energies to the companionship and training of their children and the care of their families, and should not seek employment outside the home unless there is no other way that the family's basic needs can be provided. Again, same thing. Letter from the First Presidency to Neil A. Maxwell, Dallin Oaks, quoted by Elder Oaks. So what was quoted by Oaks is then put into a manual. So now that First Presidency letter, which has weight on its own, is in a manual. I think, again, this is the Gospel Principles Manual, I assume. Then below that, the mother who suddenly finds herself working as a wage earner for her family in addition to performing home duties has great need for education. If she has prepared herself earlier, better opportunities will be available and she can become employed more quickly. So they're recognizing that some women will in fact work, and they offer what they perceive as good advice. We should not expect government or welfare agency to care for our needs if we can work. By the way, that was another thing that happened in Mormonism at the same time, is that we were told, shame on you if you take government welfare, shame on you if you ask the government for any help. always come to us. So now you have to feel the shame, the double shame. Don't go to the government. That would be shameful. Instead, come to us. So sit down with your bishop and tell him how horrible things are so that he can give you some free food from the storehouse and maybe decide that you don't deserve it or give you lots of tasks to complete in order to receive it.
Yeah, lots of strings on that. But I think now it's kind of different. They say, can you go to family? And what about this program? But I definitely fell into that trap. There were times early on when, my husband was laid off in a scenario, and I would have been eligible for some of the programs for someone with little kids, right? You can get certain necessities, but I never thought of doing that ever, just because of quotes like this and advice like this. And later I realized, what would have been wrong with that? That really would have taken the edge off, especially since I had little kids, like formula and some of those basic necessities. So yeah, you definitely weren't making decisions that were best for you or your family without this other voice in your head, if you know what I mean, telling you, oh, we don't do that, or, oh, that's not an option. And that voice shouldn't be there when you're faced with a situation like a layoff or something. You need to really strategize on what's going to work for you and your family without that voice.
Yeah. And Guy McDude says this is approaching doctrine supported by a lot of the brethren, and it gets way worse. So Ezra Taft Benson gave a talk, a fireside address, 22 February 1987, titled To the Mothers in Zion. I'm going to make this larger, Rebecca. And if it's big enough, would you mind reading this?
Yeah, you're going to have to make it a lot larger. There we go. Okay. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
I do.
Okay. All right. Yes, this is Ezra Taft Benson. Here we go. Again, President Kimball speaks. The husband's expected to support the family, and only in an emergency should the wife secure outside employment. Her place is in the home to build the home into a heaven of delight. If that's not pressure, I don't know what it is. Numerous divorces can be traced directly to the day that the wife left the home and went out into the world, into employment. Two incomes raise the standard of living beyond its norm. Two spouses working prevent the complete and proper home life. Breaking into family prayers. It creates an independence which is not cooperative, causes distortion, limits the family, and frustrates the children already born. This is from a fireside in San Antonio in 1977. Finally, President Kimball counsels, I beg of you, you who could and should be bearing and rearing a family, wives, come home from the typewriter. Yeah, because that's about the only thing you could do, right? A typewriter. Come home from the typewriter, the laundry, the nursing. Oh, this is great. This is what they think women can do. The nursing, come home from the factory, the cafe. No career approaches the importance of that of wife, homemaker, mother, cooking meals, washing dishes, making beds for one's precious husband and children. Come home, wives, to your husbands. Make home a heaven for them. Come home, wives, to your children, born and unborn. Wrap the motherly cloak about you and unembarrassed help in a major role to create the bodies for immortal souls who anxiously await. And that is a huge pressure. I'm sure all the women and men in the chat of a certain age can relate to that. There are unborn spirits waiting to come, right? That's a huge one. Into your perfect home where you're not working.
Yep, totally. So this was a talk that was a fireside. I'm going to get rid of that quote so I can see it again. 22 February 1987. This, I believe, was also something from that talk. It said, again, in the Doctrine and Covenants, we read, women have claim on their husbands for their maintenance until their husbands are taken. D&C 83:2. This is the divine.
That mean taken in death or taken on a mission?
Taken in death. Well, yeah, unless the prophet wants to marry your daughter, or your wife. Yeah. This is the divine right of a wife and mother. She cares for and nourishes her children at home. Her husband earns the living for the family, which makes this nourishing possible. With that claim on their husbands for their financial support, the counsel of the church has always been. Now, that's pretty direct. That's the counsel of the church has always been for mothers to spend their full time in the home in rearing and caring for their children. Again, it's not always been now, because in the modern moment, you're seeing the church shift away from this. They gave a couple decades of silence, which they always do when they make dramatic changes, and they hope that enough people have forgotten, enough people have been raised without the teaching, that they can sort of move on to something else, and not enough people will be agitated or remember it. but it seems like they sort of miscalculated on this one. So
Yeah. Oh,
again,
no, we remember. And I can give you an example from my days at BYU. So I mentioned before that I worked in the BYU library. My master's is in library and information science. And I worked while I had young children. I had my first son and I continued working and put him in daycare. That was very difficult. I felt really, really guilty. There was nobody else in my department or really anybody that I saw at that time in the mid 90s that had children. I was about the only one that had returned to work after having my first child. And then I had and I found out with my first child that there was no maternity leave at BYU. They barely just changed that a couple years ago. And I stood up and applauded because I remember finding that out. I had friends that worked back in the day in the Provo area, Word Perfect, Novell. There was maternity leave. And so I assumed I would have maternity leave. And I remember talking to my boss and I said, so I thought it probably wouldn't be as good as others, but I figured there'd be something. I said, is there what, like a 3/4? And she's like, oh no, there's no maternity leave. Like there's no maternity leave. So because of my economic situation, I had a C-section and went back to work 4 days later because you just do what you have to do. That is what you do. And I remember no accommodation for a nursing mother who might need to pump. I remember asking, is there anywhere I could go? No, we don't really do that because people just stay home with their kids. They don't really come back to work. So I have this memory of being in my car in a frozen winter day, parking lot outside the library, kind of a blanket up in the window, students walking by me. And I'm just like, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. But it's what I had to do. And then I had my second son. And then it was really strange for everybody because I was still working. What the heck? In fact, I was working overtime. What was wrong with me, right? But that was just my situation. And, while people were nice about it, there certainly wasn't any institutional care or thought or maternity leave for people that were having a family and working. And so eventually, just because of that, my husband and I, our family, we decided, you know what, I think we're just going to put our trust in the Lord, right? And I'm going to quit my job. And I did that in 2001. I'm going to go home and I'm going to be a full-time mom to my little kids that were under kindergarten age. I decided to go home and be a full-time mom, which is why I always joke and say, where's my freaking 401k? Well, I'll tell you where it is. I left the worst workforce for a couple decades. And then what happens to you when you go back, like me in my 50s, it's a little different, right? A lot of things that you went to school for and had your master's for, you might be a little on the obsolete side. So that's when you decide to start a podcast. I guess that's it. But again, it just, it was a different day. And as Elder Holland likes to remind us, the church is always 20 years behind. It certainly was on maternity leave or any kind of support for women that wanted to continue working in a church environment, a church school, and also have children. So again, just my personal experience, but it had some ramifications in my life for sure. Oops. Are you muted?
Yeah. Their policies with being able to take leave and the like, I mean, they really were making it so that you felt it was going to be really difficult to come back. It was going to be really difficult to step away. It was going to make things harder as you got closer to term with your pregnancy.
Yeah.
It wasn't very employee friendly at all. And again, whether intentional or not, it certainly gives a certain kind of message about how they place importance on taking care of female employees in the situation of being pregnant and about to deliver. I just want to note too, Donna Allen, I appreciate your comment. She goes, actually, my husband treated me so poorly. This idea of being so important as a mother saved my self-esteem. And I want to say amen to that. Like that's a beautiful thing, but that's not because staying home was a true principle. That's because her husband was really shitty to her. And I just want to note too, she follows it up by saying, I actually loved being a stay-at-home mom, but it should have been one's choice among many, not a commandment. And I think she hits it on the head there. So
that's the bottom line. And when I went home, I absolutely loved being a stay-at-home mom. I did all the things, and you know what I'm talking about, all the things. And it was a wonderful time. And I did do what so many Mormon women do. They find something to do on the weekends or part-time after the kids go to bed. There's this whole little cottage industry. A lot of women got involved in MLMs. I didn't ever do that, but I tried to do a little editing on the side, work for, here and there, piecemeal, back and forth, that kind of thing, and channel my energies there. But I absolutely loved being a stay-at-home mom, so I don't know. It's kind of it's a double-edged sword. It's hard to look back and wonder what would it have been like if I would have stayed in my career, because it was a career. That's the thing. I think that's interesting. That quote we read before, come home from the laundry, the cafe, he couldn't fathom the woman could go to school for something, get a master's degree and actually have a career, but that's the thing. I mean, I'll say this, both my parents were highly educated. I've talked about this before. My dad had his doctorate. My mom had her master's, in the 60s. And I was always raised to know that I would, go on to get an advanced degree. I would be educated, but they never gave me the idea that I would ever do anything with that, because my own mom with her master's degree, she did not work. My dad worked and she took care of the family. So it was almost like my sister was raised the same way. And we always say to each other, we were raised like somebody in a Jane Austen novel, highly educated, but as far as a practical implication or a monetary implication, that just wasn't something that you even thought about, which I don't know if anybody else can relate to that. And it was always like, if my husband were to die, then I might have to go back to work. It's such an interesting, it's just really hard to explain what it was like. It was just in the water. There wasn't one quote. There wasn't one conference talk. It was just there. And your friends all knew that you would marry somebody that would be able to support you, and you probably would not work. You might work part-time later, but we were going to be moms. The activities in Young Women's were, making a wedding dress or writing in your journal about characteristics of your future husband, or making a babysitting kit. You didn't have the same kind of training that the boys had as far as career training and getting to go places and learn about different careers. You just didn't, because it was set for you what you were going to do.
Yeah, she said here, the most talented and useless skills. Yeah. I just want to note, we'll get to this next one here. This one is a little odd. I was mentioning this to you before the show started. Yeah. This is Camilla Kimball giving a talk in October 1979 General Conference, but not her talk. President Kimball said, give my talk. So he writes out the talk where women are going to be told to stay at home. And then he gives the talk to his wife and he asks her to read it. So that way the women will hear a woman's voice admonishing them to stay in the home. Do you want to read this one, Rebecca?
Yeah. And I have to say, that reminds me very much of Sister Dennis. I feel like her two talks of note recently, the one about Mormon women have more power than anyone else, and also her talk on the garment of the holy priesthood. I feel like those talks were written by men, and they needed a woman's voice to deliver them. So I think that this is still happening. Okay, this says, and for some reason, my face is on the writing. Can you?
Yeah, I'll take it off. Sorry about that.
I can't read past my big old face. All right. Some women, because of their circumstances beyond their control, must work. We understand that. We understand further that as families are raised, the talents God has given you and blessed you with can often be put to effective use in additional service to mankind. Do not, however, make the mistake of being drawn off into secondary tasks, which will cause the neglect of your eternal assignments, such as giving birth to and rearing the spirit children of our Father in heaven. Pray carefully over all of your decisions. So along with staying home, again, this doctrine of the spirits that are waiting, the spirits that are waiting. And this was a real thing. I have a friend that passed away because she had health complications and felt the pull that there were more spirits waiting, and kept trying, and it did not go well, to the devastation of everyone around. This was a real thing that people, and I don't know if anyone in the chat can speak to that, but this idea that there are more spirits waiting. And you also had the example of, some of your church leaders that had so many children, right? It was this idea. I only had 3 children. And see, I say only even now. And I admit, you parade into church, and if you've only got the 3, I don't know what happened, right?
That's not exactly multiplying and replenishing the earth.
Exactly. I didn't have I got married when I was 20, almost 26. really old by LDS terms.
You were
I
a
didn't have my
nuisance
first
to
child.
society, according to Brigham Young.
I know. I was a menace. I did not have children. My first son was born when I was 30. Oh my goodness, what's wrong with me, right? I was bucking the system. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And we had so many people invasively ask us, well, what's wrong? Did you check the plumbing? How come you don't have kids? I mean, people, not only are the leaders giving you, these kinds of comments from the pulpit, but you have people, ward members, policing you. I remember my husband, when I was working and he was working, and some people in his office said, what do you mean your wife works? What are you talking about? Dude, you got to get her home. What's wrong with you? Right? So it's women, but it's also men that bear this burden of you're not doing the right thing, and you're being policed by ward members, other members of the church in the neighborhood. And then you're getting these comments. Again, how can you possibly, as a couple, make a decision that's best for your particular circumstance when you have all these voices around you telling you how it should be, and also shaming you if you're doing something that they don't consider to be the right thing?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So from here, this is where it gets this is the moment in the show where we're going to show you Mormonism doing what Mormonism does. It's one thing to have taught all of this. It's another thing to take some of the most explicit moments of it and try to sort of get rid of them. And it's the thing that Mormonism does. So I'm actually going to put up the screen. This is the church website. You can go to this. You can type in Google LDS.org space Women's Divine Roles and Responsibilities. This will come up. This will be one of the top 1 or 2, 3 search results. It is the page on LDS.org titled Women's Divine Roles and Responsibilities. No more sacred word exists in secular Holy Writ than that of Mother, President Ezra Taft Benson. What I want you to note is right below selected teachings. See also Mother's Employment Outside the Home on pages 237 and 240, except you can't do anything with it. And if you copy it and you go up here to a search engine and you put it in, Women's Divine Roles and Responsibilities, that's the same thing. So it isn't anywhere. There isn't anything about that. I guess you can go to Building an Eternal Marriage, which might be that section. But if you go down and try to open this one up and scan through all the lessons, let's see if they have it. I actually didn't. Women's Divine Roles and Responsibilities, Selected Teachings, Women's, here we go, page 347, 349. You can't get to it. I tried finding this in lots of different ways. What I ended up having to do was I had to go to the Wayback Machine.
Huh.
And then I found it. And in the Wayback Machine, you get Mother's Employment Outside the Home. It's part of the old Eternal Marriages Student Manual, but as far as I know, it's not part of the current one. I'm still looking just to make sure. Actually, here is, I'm going to put this back up. And I'm willing to be wrong. Here is it again. This is lesson 15, Mother's Employment Outside the Home. Oh, look at that. Selected teachings. It doesn't go anywhere. Nothing on the right-hand side. I select it again. Uh-oh. See what we get. Oh, nothing. Nothing there. It's gone. But you can go to the Wayback Machine. I'll make sure that this is in the show notes. After the show is over, I'll put it there so that folks can go read this. I did put it up here at the top. This is what the top of it looked like. But there in this again was on the church's website. This was a long article. This will be 3 pages of 3 columns each. The writing's really small. So Rebecca, if you don't mind, I'll read these.
I think you better.
So it says in the top left, and I'll just read the red sections. The husband is expected to support his family, and only in an emergency should a wife secure outside employment. Her place is in the home, to build the home into a heaven of delight. Again, these are things we've already read, but now the church has them all in one place, originally on the church's website, also part of its manual on celestial marriage, its institute manual and college manual that it would have used for students at BYU and students taking institute. Next up, it says numerous divorces can be traced directly to the day when the wife left the home and went out into the world into employment. The third one down says wives come home from the typewriter, the laundry, the nursing, come home from the factory, the cafe. Again, we're repeating ourselves, but in a different location. Remember, doctrine is that which is consistently taught by all leaders. By the way, this leader, I don't see it there, but I need to open up my on my side. This is President Spencer W. Kimball. So this left-hand column is all Spencer W. Kimball. The next quote is, "Come home, wives, to your husbands. Make home a heaven for them. Come home, wives, to your children, born and unborn." Again, we've heard that already too. Middle column and right column is President Ezra Taft Benson. "In a home where there is an able-bodied husband, he is expected to be the breadwinner. Sometimes we hear of husbands who, because of economic conditions, have lost their jobs and expect the wives to go out of the home and work, even though the husband is capable of providing for his family. In these cases, we urge the husband to do all in his power to allow his wife to remain in the home, caring for the children, while he continues to provide for his family the best he can, even though the job he is able to secure may not be ideal and family budgeting may have to be tighter." Ezra Taft Benson follows it up with, or at least another quote from him is used to follow up that one, with, "Sometimes the mother works outside of the home at the encouragement or even insistence of her husband. It is he who wants the items or conveniences that the extra income can buy. Not only will the family suffer in such instances, brethren, but your own spiritual growth and progression will be hampered. I say to all of you, the Lord has charged men with the responsibility to provide for their families in such a way that the wife is allowed to fulfill her role as mother in the home." Then at the bottom, "There are voices in our midst which would attempt to convince you that these home-centered truths are not applicable to our present-day conditions. If you listen and heed, you will be lured away from your principal obligations." By the way, isn't that exactly what a few of the female leaders in the church did in the modern moment, which caused the uproar of the general women in the church? That there are voices in our midst which would attempt to convince you that these home-centered truths about the woman staying in the home are not applicable to our present-day conditions. Again, present-day conditions don't change the doctrines of and the teachings of prophets, seers, and revelators. If you listen and heed, you will be lured away from your principal obligations. So then on the right-hand column, again, still President Benson, they maintain that some women are better suited for careers than for marriage and motherhood. And in some ways, she seemed to have been saying exactly that, hey, I was made for the workforce. These individuals spread their discontent by the propaganda that there are more exciting and self-fulfilling roles for women than homemaking. Some even have been bold to suggest that the church move away from the Mormon woman stereotype of homemaking and rearing children. They also say it is wise to limit your family so you can have more time for personal goals and self-fulfillment. By the way, you are seeing the church begin to shift into this exact sort of space. They have set down emphasizing these teachings that are up on the screen right now, and they have moved into a stage of silence for a decade or two. And now we're moving into a stage where leaders of the LDS Church, female leaders, are getting up and speaking about their careers as if that was never a problem in the first place. You're seeing this very thing the church prophesied about what would happen in the world, and it's happening right here inside the LDS Church.
And that's so confusing to those of us that followed what we thought was the counsel. When we see someone like Camille Johnson who had a nanny and followed her career, a lot of us are scratching our heads saying, you could have done that? You can do that? I mean, it sounds strange, but just for them to so nonchalantly say, this is what we did and this is what everyone was doing. It was not what everyone was doing at all.
Yeah. And I want to note here, because I might forget to mention it later. My girlfriend, her mom, she goes to her mom and she says, "Mom, what about what the church used to teach about, being an at-home mom?" And her mom said, "Oh, the church never taught that. The church never said that to us. We were always allowed to, she somehow has been programmed to, and this is woman in her 60s or 70s.
How old is her mom? That's what I was
Yes.
going to ask.
Late 60s, late 70s, somewhere in there, right?
No.
And she's saying, no, it's always been the way it is now.
No.
Which we're showing right now on the screen that's so far from the truth. You're noting that sort of the people in this generation will be allowed to think that Mormonism never did that to them.
Yep. We've always believed in the steeple. Yeah. We've always been able to work.
Yeah.
It's 1984 all over again.
And it's not the only thing that her mom's done that with. Her mom has done that with the stone in the hat.
Yeah.
Her mom has done that with other teachings. Yeah. And so you see that the believer, somehow there's so much pressure on the believer to get in line, that 40 years of programming, of inoculation, of brainwashing to some extent, that just in a few years of saying a different message, it's like the first message was never given. And it's like the Twilight Zone to me. It's such a strange thing. It's bizarro world. So I'll go back here. This is the last one by Ezra Taft Benson. He says, the seeds of divorce are often sown in the blessings of children delayed by wives working outside the home. Working mothers should remember that their children usually need more of mother than of money. And I'm not even saying some of this isn't sort of a bad idea exactly. Some of these things I think are concepts that can help us all make decisions. But when you put this much shame and guilt on somebody to live their life a certain way, you're really messing up their world. And then years later, when they realize that your message has changed, just like what happened in Mormonism, women are going to be up in arms thinking, how dare you preach the opposite message today when you crushed all my dreams 25 years ago, 35 years ago, 45 years ago. And you made it so that I wanted to do something. I had a dream to do something, but I thought it was more important that I did what you told me to do. And now you're backing away from pretending that was what we were supposed to do. That it's such a crazy thing.
No, it is. And if you go down that rabbit hole, you can get really upset. So I'll tell you another story about me. When I was in high school, I was a creative writer. I loved to write scripts and jingles. And all. So I said, I'm going to go into advertising. That's what I want to do at BYU. Number one, I never thought of doing anything but going to BYU, right? Because I have to get married. That's what you do. So I go to BYU. My major is advertising, but I go there, and this is 1984. They're mostly guys in the program, right? You can tell that it's definitely a career track. Like, how would I do this and be a mom? So after a year of that, even though that was my love and my passion, creative writing, script writing, all kinds of things like that, I decided, you know what, a fine arts degree, a liberal arts degree would probably be better. So I switched over to the humanities department and art history with a little bit of Latin thrown in because, I'm going to be a mom and I can teach my kids, and I'm sure I can find something to do on the side with this background. So, and again, I did it to myself. Nobody told me you can't stay in that program. I certainly could have stayed in that program. But again, I looked around, I thought, oh, this just seems to be a lot of guys that are really career oriented. They're really driven. I don't know if I fit in. I just kind of put myself in the back seat, and that's what I did. So, and I think a lot of girls are like that. Instead you get the home and family living degree because that's going to be very conducive to you as a mother. My other point, I think, about all these quotes, my observation that you've been reading is that it seems like the brethren feel there's this extra income or luxuries. They think that when a woman works, it's for the extra stuff or the luxuries. Well, that's not the case. In many situations, the woman is working so the family can survive. And it's insulting to say that a husband lets a wife work just so they can have those extras. That is not the case at all. But if you read back through all those quotes, that seems to be how they see it. I don't think they have a real grasp on real world economics of families that are also trying to pay tithing and fast offerings and maybe money to those funds that you were supposed to support all those years. It's a huge drain on a family finance who can never get ahead, even at a middle range income. And so when a wife works, it's not luxury. Usually it's necessity. And I take exception to that, to their just complete they're oblivious, I think, to what it was really like.
Yeah. And I'll just note, these are the same 15 leaders. Again, I don't mean the exact same men. I just mean 15 leaders from generation to generation who by the time they die, they have several homes, not one home, not two homes. They got 3, 4, 5 homes. These are people who not only get some sort of stipend, which is it's a nonsensical word to use in this situation. They get a full-blown salary. Not only do they get a salary, and I won't even begin to say the things that we sort of think they get based on what Grant Palmer and Enzio Bushy, what was relayed to Grant Palmer by 70 Enzio Bushy. I'll just stick to what we can be almost certain of. By having a salary of over $100,000 while also getting entirely free health care, being able to, again, mission presidents are allowed to spend $10,000 on an anniversary gift for their wife. So you can bet your ass that the top 15 are allowed to buy gifts for their wives. So the expensive gifts that one would get your spouse, that's covered under the church salary. You get to fly anywhere in the world, first class, treated like a king. Anywhere you go, your trip is going to be paid for. You're going to have a fireside on a Thursday night, but you're going to stay in Brazil for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and it's going to be a vacation. Everything's going to be taken care of. You get free automobiles. You get free travel.
Free
in
college
any shape or
for the
form. Yep.
kids.
Free college for the kids. And in some instances, we've heard possibly the grandkids as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when you add all that up, what that means is that your salary of back in when Elder Eyring's paycheck got released in like 2013 or so, it was $120,000.
Yeah.
It certainly is more than that today. 150, 170, again, with inflation and everything that's gone on. So not only do you get all those freebies, but once you have all those freebies, you don't have any expenses. They're all taken care of. So your $150,000, your $180,000, that's all free money. You pay taxes on it, sure, but then you put it in your savings account. And by the time you die, someone like President Monson or President Packer, who had not extravagant careers, both ended up with a multitude of properties when they got towards the end of their life. It is a racket. And once you understand it and you go like, well, yeah, if I had this paid for, let's see, what are all my expenses? Remember, these guys are put up in an apartment in Salt Lake City. And when you say apartment, we're not talking like a 400 square foot apartment. They have nice places. So their bills are paid for, the utilities are paid for, their place they stay at is paid for, their insurance is paid for, their travel is paid for, their automobile is paid for. It's all paid for.
It's all paid for.
The money they get is
in
just.
fact, over the weekend, I was at my high school reunion. That was awfully fun. I got to visit RFM, and then I came home with a cold. But talking to a friend,
you and RFM went to the same school.
Yeah, no,
okay.
Not at all. No. We're several classes apart. But in talking to a friend who had a friend that has this amazing, incredible Alaskan hunting and game lodge, so expensive that you can't even ask how much it is. I mean, we're talking it's celebrity level. And guess who the friend dropped that they host all the time? Apostles.
Yep.
Apostles.
Yep.
So for anybody, my parents passed away recently in the last 4 months. They thought to their dying day that the apostles and the church leaders were without purse or script. They, just like it says in the scriptures, they did not understand exactly what was happening, that they didn't understand at all. And that was so infuriating to me because I was trying to get them to understand it's so unfair. Because when you look at the average person, and Mormonish did a really awesome episode on this, we had a financial planner accountant come to us who'd been a ward clerk for years and years, faithful member. And he said, I really want to come on your show. No faithful show will let me come on. And I want to talk about tithing. And I want to explain through graphs what a just middle income family, just middle income, the bottomless pit that tithing, the way it is paid now is. And he was able to show us, I can link this in your show notes if you'll let me, that you can't escape. Even that 10%, it just drags you completely down to the point where only necessities, nothing else at all. And he, of course, was trying to promote this method of surplus, needs and wants, and hoping that maybe a bishop might see the episode and say, yeah, I can counsel people to pay in this way. That way they can go to the temple. They'll also have some kind of a life without this frustration and even terror. Anybody that's been out of a job and sees your savings dwindling, you know what I'm talking about. It impacts every single aspect of your life. And it was interesting because about a month or so after the episode aired, I had somebody reach out and she said, I showed that video with that perspective on tithing, that idea of the bottomless pit that you can't get out of, and a new way to look at it. I showed it to my faithful husband, and he looked at it and he said, you know what? I see that. She said, now we're out of debt and we can pay for some music lessons, which is not a luxury. That's something really important to my child. So this idea that you're going to a hunting lodge or you're getting everything paid for, why everyone else trying to be faithful and paying that tithing when you honestly don't have a concept of what it's doing to your bottom line if you're in a median income, people need to understand this, because it's a never ending cycle and it's not fair. It's infuriating, actually.
Yeah. And my point with the leaders was that they're criticizing men and women, husband and wives, for making decisions about what goes on when these men are, so, you point out with the hunting lodge thing from earlier, these men are so privileged and they want you to think, they want the average member to think that they've given up a lot to do this calling and
like
they
parents.
don't make much money and they've given up these successful careers. And I'm just telling you, they are taken care of until their last breath. And they all live, with a few exceptions, they all live into their late 80s, 90s, 100 years old is what we're seeing now, because their health care is so good. They are privileged human beings who have no gumption of what it really means, to the point where President Nelson goes into Africa and tells the African saints to pay tithing in order to get out of poverty. He doesn't have a clue. That only makes sense if he's trying to get more money in his own pocket. So let me put this back up on the screen. This is the second page of these quotes. This is actually, this was the last one. So let me go back to the middle one here. So this is President Gordon B. Hinckley. These are all from him. And so this one says, let me get rid of the comment. I recognize that some women must work, but I fear that there are far too many who do so only to get the means for a little more luxury and a few fancier toys, says the guy who has everything paid for, gets everything he wants, gets to do whatever, and then gets to take his salary and put it into a savings account, into an investment account, because don't you dare think that Ensign Peak investing the church's money, that they aren't asked for their opinions privately by these men as well. Like, hey, should I invest? You know darn well if Ensign Peak is saying, hey, church, invest in these things, then those top 15 men are using the exact same investment advice privately. These men are privileged, and they shame and condemn and guilt the members of the church for choosing to live their lives in the way that they think is best, when these men have access to so much money and resources that it isn't even debatable at this point. We all know enough information to know that that's the case. They get a salary, which they call a stipend. They get a salary. They get healthcare, travel, car, everything, you name it. Okay, next.
It's I was going to say, let them eat cake level. No concept of what the average family is going through or the decisions that they're making.
None. If you must work, you have an increased load to bear. You cannot afford to neglect your children. So if you work and you start to notice that you can't quite give your kids everything in terms of emotional connection, whatever it is that is left out, man, you better feel more shame on top of what shame we've already given you. If you must work, you have an increased load to bear. You cannot afford to neglect your children. They need your supervision in studying, in working inside and outside the home, in the nurturing that only you can adequately give, the love, the blessings, the encouragement, and the closeness of a mother. Next, some years ago, President Benson delivered, again, this is all Gordon B. Hinckley. Some years ago, President Benson delivered a message to the women of the church. He encouraged them to leave their employment and give their individual time to their children. I sustain the position which he took. The next one, there are some women who have to work there are some women who have to work to provide for the needs of their families. To you, I say, do the very best you can. I hope that if you are employed full-time, you are doing it to ensure the basic needs are met and not simply to indulge a taste for an elaborate home, fancy cars, and other luxuries.
See, that's infuriating. I keep using that word, but it is. They have no concept. People are not working to do that. Oh my goodness.
Says the men who have elaborate
Yeah.
homes and fancy cars and other luxuries.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the last one here, now to others who work when it is not necessary and who, while doing so, leave children to the care of those. By the way, these men, I can't say this like I know this for sure, but my hunch is, and I feel pretty safe in saying this, these men were absent fathers themselves.
Yep.
These men
Everyone
gave
was.
their lives to the church. That's where they got their recognition. That's where they got their value. These men wanted to be serving in church things. It's rare, I think, to find a LDS leader to go back to his family and ask the kids and the grandkids and go, how much of dad and grandpa did you actually get to experience? And what stories I've heard is very little did I get to see dad or grandpa. So these are the very men who are speaking out of both sides of their mouth. These are hypocrites. Now, to others who work when it is not necessary and who, while doing so, leave children to the care of those who are often only poor substitutes, I offer a word of caution. Do not follow a practice which will bring you later regret. If the purpose of your daily employment is simply to get money for a boat or a fancy automobile, again, these are the guys that don't have to pay for the boat or the fancy automobile or some other desirable but unnecessary thing, and in the process you lose your companionship of your children and the opportunity to rear them, you may find that you have lost the substance while grasping at the shadow. They might as well be looking in the mirror and talking to themselves. One more. This was the last one. And this one is on the left-hand side is Elder Howard W. Hunter. And on the right-hand side is Elder Boyd K. Packer and Elder Richard G. Scott. Elder Howard W. Hunter said, I completed my, and this is all one composite of quotes on the church. It used to be on the church's website in one section. This was let's hammer it home. This is doctrine taught consistently by all of the brethren. So you have Elder Howard W. Hunter. It says, I completed my undergraduate work and entered law school. I took classes at night because it was necessary to be employed during the daytime. Needless to say, I had the help and support of my wife. She remained a homemaker and cared for our children. What she gave in love, encouragement, frugality, and companionship was far in excess of any material contribution she might have made by taking employment. And then he continues, no one expends more energy than a devoted mother and wife. And in the usual arrangement of things, however, it is the man to whom the Lord has assigned the breadwinner role. It's like there's a sort of giveaway of a truth here, which is most of the time, the man's job is the easier of the two tasks. And the woman who stays at home to raise the children is the one who is really being ran over, who feels exhausted, who is burned out to a much greater degree than the guy who leaves every day from 9 to 5. And he sort of nods at that. He sort of tips his hat to that and says, that's true, but I'm sorry, God said so. God said we're the breadwinner. It's the Lord who made the assignments. Who are we to complain about them?
Yeah,
So
and I
there's
think
that.
all of us of a certain age, we never saw our dads, like you said. We never did, you know.
Mm-mm.
It was church work or work.
Yeah.
And I read an article, probably you guys have seen this before, where it says, Why I Will Never Help My Wife. It's written by a man. Why I Will Never Help My Wife, right? It's a very provocative title. What he means is you don't help your wife. You're an equal partner in all of those duties. You don't help with the dishes. You do the dishes. Those are your dishes. You don't help change the diaper, put the baby down. It's your baby. You put the baby down, you change the diaper. But it's definitely not a mindset that the church was behind or promoted. The father provided and presided. And that still exists today. In my ward, when I was still attending, I can't tell you how many times I heard that from the pulpit. Your job is to provide and preside. And again, I say men are trapped in this too. Men are trapped in this cycle too. It's very unhealthy for families as a whole.
Yeah, 100%. Elder Boyd K. Packer says the first presidency counseled that the mother who entrust her child to the care of others that she may do non-motherly work, whether for gold or for fame or for civic service, should remember that a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. So he quotes Proverbs 29:15. And then he says, in our day, the Lord has said that unless parents teach their children the doctrines of the church, the sin will be upon the heads of the parents. So he quotes D&C 68:25. So he's saying in days of old and in the modern day, the Lord has been crystal clear to you women, do not work outside the home. And then he said on another occasion, that message and warning from the first presidency is needed more, not less today than when it was given. This revelation was supposed to grow more needed with age. This was supposed to age well. He says, and no voice from any organization of the church on any level of administration equals that of the first presidency. So it would be, what he's sort of saying, he doesn't say it explicitly, so I will leave there. I guess there's loophole for apologists to come in and make it so that it's not saying what I think it says. But what he's saying is that this is an eternal piece of counsel. This counsel is good forever. It's going to age well. It's more needed in our day than it was in days past. And here we are. That was 1993. Here we are 31 years later. And it is being done away with as we speak. So in the age of thousands of years, if you're an Orthodox Mormon who believes in a 6,000-year-old earth, in the thousands of years of eternal doctrine, 30 years, and it's a 180 turn. They are beginning to head the other direction. Elder Richard G. Scott, I'll finish up here. President Benson has taught that a mother with children should be in the home. And then he talks about how there are exceptions. And he says, but these instances are the exception, not the rule. You, in these unusual circumstances, qualify for additional inspiration and strength from the Lord. Those who leave the home for lesser reasons will not. So if you were a woman, you were a Mormon, and you went out and worked outside the home, if you had any doubt about what that money was going to and just being in terms of needs, I mean, heaven forbid you buy yourself a nice jacket. Heaven forbid you get a car that doesn't have 150,000 miles on it. Heaven forbid you buy a home that will give each of your kids enough space that they can experience some space as their own. Heaven forbid you do that, because if you do that, you're going to feel the shame of quotes like this. And as you point out, you said this earlier, it puts shame on men too. Mm-hmm. I mentioned this. Amanda had to work weekends. Amanda had to work some evenings for us to make the basic needs get met. And what was basic needs and what wasn't? I mean, we were living on, again, fried bologna sandwiches, chicken nuggets, tuna fish sandwich. I mean, our menu consisted of the same 7 poor man foods over and over and over again. And then every other week or so, we'd splurge and we'd get pizza, and that would be it. So toast and cheese and tomato soup, hamburger gravy, breakfast for dinner, because breakfast foods were always cheaper. And then as a man, I felt so much shame because she had to work some for us to even get by. And I was constantly having to deal with sort of these past quotes and members of my ward reiterating them. And so men had to live with some of this shame as well. Okay, and then sort of wrapping up, this is not correlated material, but this was President Spencer W. Kimball. Rebecca, would you mind taking this one?
I'm sorry. They just pull the weirdest things out. This is President Kimball. He taught too many mothers work away from the home to furnish sweaters and music lessons and trips and fun for their children.
Heaven forbid.
What?
Heaven forbid.
Yeah, heaven forbid that you would offer your child a sweater and a music lesson. Good God. Too many women spend their time in socializing, in politicking, in public services when they should be home to teach and train and receive the love of their children into security.
Says the guy who gets to travel all around the world and take vacations and call it a fireside, and then spend several days on each side of that fireside doing whatever he wants and having it all paid for. Sweaters, music lessons. I mean, I think in some ways you could justify those as needs. I mean,
Those are needs.
you've got to give kids some
Yep.
sort of activities and things to be involved in, things to grow in, things to excel at. And everybody deserves a vacation every now and then. Everybody deserves to have some fun for themselves and with their children. It's such a crazy quote to be saying. And then to the mothers in Zion, here was a pamphlet in the church. I remember this pamphlet. I remember the missionaries still having this to give out when I joined the church in the 90s. And the year on that looks like 1987, 22 February 1987, I believe. I'll read the first one if you don't mind taking the second one. It says, the Lord clearly defined the roles of mothers and fathers in providing for, again, the Lord clearly defined the roles of mothers and fathers in providing for and rearing a righteous posterity. In the beginning, Adam, not Eve, was instructed to earn the bread by the sweat of his brow. Contrary to conventional wisdom, a mother's calling is in the home, not in the marketplace.
All right, let's see. The second half says, again, in the Doctrine and Covenants, we read, women have claim on their husbands for their maintenance until their husbands are taken, whatever that means. This is the divine right of a wife and mother. She cares for and nourishes her children at home. Her husband earns the living for the family, which makes the nourishing possible. With that claim on their husbands for their financial support, the counsel of the church has always been for mothers to spend their full time in the home for rearing and caring for the children.
Yep. So, trying to think what I want to say here. I mean, obviously they quote the DNC again, 83-2.
What year was that again?
This is 1987.
This is 87. Yeah. For people that think this ended in the 70s, no, we're talking the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s. I remember being in primary because I always talk about how I'm a primary pianist, and they were singing that song about mothers and fathers, and they brought two little kids up and they said, now here's the briefcase, because they were going to have little props, and the girl reached out for it. One was a baby doll and one was a briefcase. And the song leader said, oh, no, you don't get the briefcase. You get the baby doll. And the little girl's like, but I want the briefcase. But that wasn't going to happen. She was going to hold the baby doll, and the little boy was going to hold the briefcase. So this is still going on.
And to the younger people in the church, the internet didn't even really come online until like the mid 1990s.
Right.
Early 90s, sort of, but you know, it was much more complicated than saying it came on in the early 90s. It was really the mid 90s where the internet starts to become sort of a usable thing for research, finding information. So when I show you the page from earlier, from Mother's Employment Outside the Home, at the very earliest this would be the mid 90s. And this was sort of the look that the church's website had in sort of the mid 90s to like the mid 2000s, 2005 or so. So again, this isn't, as Rebecca's pointing out, this is not something said so long ago. This isn't that old. Although we are a lot older. What we think of it like the people from like the 1930s, and we go like, oh my gosh, that was old. Well, the people sort of the young generation today sort of looks at us as kind of like that. Yeah.
We're old. It's hard to find that out, but we are. But, you know, I think there's encouraging things happening, because I compare my college graduation where a lot of girls didn't graduate, right? They'd already gotten married. They were already having kids. If they did graduate, a lot of them were engaged. You didn't really hear this talk of, oh, where's your job? Where's your internship? Where are you going? I just recently attended my middle son's college graduation. Girls, boys. The girls, as I was walking through the halls of the graduation venue, you could hear all of them. I got my internship. I'm going to New York. I'm working up in Salt Lake. I'm doing this. There was definitely just this excitement of just careers and possibilities. And I'm sure marriage and family, I'm sure it was all part of it. I look at the young people that I know that are married, some of my own kids included, and they're all working, you know, and maybe when they have kids, they don't yet, they'll work that out too. But everybody is starting out, you know, going to school, realizing their dreams, working on it together. And I think there's less of this emphasis of what are the brethren telling us to do. However, then I juxtapose that with, say, the proclamation of the family, which I don't know if you have that in a slide, but that sort of makes it pretty clear that there's certain roles, very rigid roles that we need to protect, maybe shame each other into following. And so that's another issue too, because that's definitely gathering steam, the proclamation. I've seen it on yard flags recently during Pride Month. So people think, oh, it's just, sort of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. It is that, but it's also these rigid gender roles too that are being promoted.
Yeah. And as we're wrapping up here, folks, if you want to join the show, and by the way, I don't want any men calling this show. I want this to be women. So we usually take 3 phone calls at the end. I would like all 3 phone calls to be females so that you can share what your experience is in relationship to the topic tonight. And I would very much appreciate if all 3 call lines in the phone bank were left for females to call in. And we'd really love to hear from you. And so the number is 662-667-6667 or 662 Mormons if you've got the letters there below the numbers. And then I just want to say to what you just read in this quote, with that claim on their husbands for their financial support, the counsel of the church has always been, not anymore, not that they're saying the opposite yet, and I don't know that they will, but what they're going to do is just say nothing and allow working moms who move up to leadership positions to talk about their careers as if they always had free right to pursue their dreams. But that's not what it says here. With the claim of their husbands for their financial support, the counsel of the church has always been for mothers to spend their full time in the home in rearing and caring for their children. That's how you describe doctrine if there's ever a way to describe doctrine. That is doctrine. That's what the church has always taught until it doesn't. So there's that. And then,
well, and it's also a double-edged sword, I feel, for the church, because the more they're quiet about this, the more women feel comfortable moving into those positions, climbing the corporate ladder as they should and can do very well. And then you have a CEO sitting in the pew at church. Somebody reached out to me. They said, my mom pays $3 million a year in tithing. She's a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. He said she's never had any kind of calling in church that would give her any kind of leadership or anything. They overlook her completely. And yet her day job, Fortune 500. So you're going to have all these women sitting in the pew, wanting to sit on the stand, because how do you feel when you're treated with respect in every other area of your life, and then you come to church and there's a different vibe? I feel like it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so in this pamphlet, there's one more page that has to do with this pamphlet. It's also really small, so I'll have to read this, I think. But these instances are the exception, not the rule. Again, they lay out that sometimes women do have to work. He is expected to be the breadwinner, so it's the same quote we got from before. We urge the husband to do all in his power to allow his wife to remain in the home, caring for their children while he continues to provide for his family the best he can, even though the job he is able to secure may not be ideal and family budgeting will have to be tighter. This quote was shared earlier, but again, it's now in a different place. The church was so sure of all of these teachings that leaders said them and printed them and published them and taught them over and over. They kept quoting each other over and over and over again. So it goes back to Elder Anderson. The doctrine of the church isn't hard to find. It's those things taught consistently by all the leaders of the church. And if this doesn't fit into that category, I don't think anything fits into that category. It says here, let me pull this up in a different spot so I can read a little easier on my side. President, it says down below, it says he spoke as a true prophet of God. By the way, he spoke as a true prophet of God. That's also declaring that this is absolute truth. President Kimball declared, women are to take care of the family. The Lord has so stated, to be an assistant to the husband, to work with him, but not to earn the living, except in unusual circumstances. Men ought to be men indeed and earn the living under normal circumstances. President Kimball continues, too many mothers work away from the home to furnish sweaters and music lessons and trips and fun for their children. Again, same quote. Too many women spend their time in socializing and politicking in public services when they should be home to teach and train and receive and love their children into security. Remember the counsel of President Kimball to John and Mary. Mary, you are to become a career woman in the greatest career on earth, that of a homemaker, wife and mother. It was never intended by the Lord that married women should compete with men in employment. They have far greater and more important service to render. That was Faith Precedes the Miracle, Deseret Book Company. Again, President Kimball speaks. The husband is expected to support his family, and only in an emergency should a wife secure outside employment. Her place is in the home to build the home into a heaven of delight. We've heard that quote for the third time tonight. Numerous divorces, here it is again, can be traced directly to the day when the wife left the home and went out into the world into employment. Two incomes raise the standard of living beyond its norm. Two spouses working prevent the complete and proper home life, break into family prayers, create an independence which is not cooperative, causes distortion, limits the family, and frustrates the children already born. So we've heard that quote again earlier. Last one. Finally, President Kimball counsels, I beg of you, you who could and should be bearing and rearing a family, wives, come home from the typewriter, the laundry, the nursing, come home from the factory, the cafe. No career approaches in importance that of wife, homemaker, mother. And here's the important things: cooking meals, washing dishes, making beds for one's precious husband and children. Come home, wives, to your husbands. Make home a heaven for them. Come home, wives, to your children, born and unborn. Wrap the motherly cloak about you, unembarrassed. Help in a major role. Okay, so there's that. And then I want to end, and then we'll go to the phone calls. I want to end with one last one, and this is to show where the church is moving to. And it hasn't gotten to its final landing place yet. And that final landing place will not put shame on men or women, and it will maybe not correct these teachings. I highly doubt that. But it will just be silent, and it will allow people to make their own decisions about how they live their life and if they pursue their dreams out in the workforce or not. The church, as you pointed out, certainly doesn't mind double tithing. This is Quentin Cook, and this is LDS Women Are Incredible. I don't have the year on this, but this is a general conference talk. He says, and I'll let you read this because this will run counter, Rebecca, to everything that we've said so far.
That's right. It will. Second, we should all be careful not to be judgmental or assume that sisters are less valiant if the decision is made to work outside the home. We rarely understand or fully appreciate people's circumstances. Husbands and wives should prayerfully counsel together, understanding they are accountable to God for their decisions. Well, even that right there is a little threatening, isn't it? That makes you a little nervous as you sit there with your spouse trying to figure out, should you work? You're accountable to God.
Don't they do this on a lot of things, though? Like birth control used to be taught by the church as bad. And then the church said, oh, you guys make your own decision, but beware, God has said things about this stuff. We used to think like cremation was wrong, and now it sort of is allowed. But again, anytime the church changes, it sort of gets away from saying the explicit, passes the accountability onto the individual to decide, but then implicitly reminds the individual that the Lord has penalties if you don't do the right thing.
Yep.
100%.
So,
yeah. And so they finish off here. We should, and you read it, I just want to reiterate it. We should all be careful. By the way, Elder Cook, turn around and face the other 14 men. It's them that you should have been speaking to. Looking at them, you should have said, we should all be careful not to be judgmental or assume that sisters or brethren, for that matter, are less valiant if the decision is made to work for the wife to work outside the home. We, meaning the top 15 leaders of the church, rarely understand, not that he means it, it's what he should have meant. We, the brethren, rarely understand or fully appreciate people's circumstances because we're privileged and we have everything in life taken care of for us. He finishes, husbands and wives should prayerfully counsel. You already said that, that there is a penalty though in store, and it's unsaid. It's sort of just hinted at. Make the decision wisely. So there's that. Lots of women like you, Rebecca, might have lived their lives very differently if the church had given people autonomy to sit with their own insides and go, you know what? I'm not really made for kids. I worked with a female and a male, actually both, not connected to each other, two separate households. But the husband of one household and the wife of another household, I worked with the two of them, and neither of them had children. And they both just were adamant, like, we're just not made for kids. We could have had kids. Yeah. We weren't made for them. Wasn't that we were infertile? Again, that's an issue that a lot of people deal with. They decided not to have kids. They weren't made for them. There's a lot of things about my young adulthood where I was not ready to raise children. I was dysfunctional. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the experience. I didn't have, I was really a shitty dad at times because I wasn't cut out for this thing. And then this system coming along and saying, not only should you have kids, you should have more than you probably want to have. You should not only have one or two that you're sort of hesitant to have in the first place, you should have 4 or more because your job is to multiply and replenish the earth. It's a lot of pressure on a human being to compromise what their inner gut is saying about what their life should look like. And in a free country, at the very minimum, we should be free to pursue happiness. It's our God-given right. And some people are not cut out for children. These two people I worked with, I can tell you they were not cut out for children.
But do they have dogs?
They have cats in one household and dogs in the other.
Yep, that's what I'm saying. It is interesting to just watch the whole demographic change with young people, like in their 20s. Many people I know who are married in their 20s only have maybe one child, right? And they really don't plan on having any more, or they're thinking about it. Or I know young people that married quickly after high school, after mission, did not have children, divorced. But because there are no children, they've gone on their separate ways and have new lives. So I really feel like people are starting to just say, this is my life. It's my one life, and I'm going to make these decisions.
Yeah. And I think little by little, the church will get out of the way of people it's going to be confusing to people like Jacob Hansen, but the church is going to little by little retreat to spaces where they leave the old thing to stay there. They'll say a general principle, like, it's a female's job to do this and a man's job to do that, but it'll be very general. Provide and nurture, right? I think that's what the Family Proclamation says, for instance. They will get out of the business of telling you specifically what to do. And they've already, to some extent, retreated a large distance from what they used to teach on this issue and 1,000 other issues. These men who claim to be prophets, seers, and revelators, and who were so sure at the time that they were right, are little by little admitting that those past guys were wrong. Any last thoughts from you?
Although the bottom line, I think they are concerned about that. And that is the number one way to increase membership is to have people born into the church. To me, that's really the only way, sizable way to have people join the church. And so you do see these young adult firesides and devotionals that are online, like the one last year with President Oaks and his lovely second wife, Kristen, where, they encourage people to get married. Don't put getting married off. Make sure that you have children. And then he said, right, Kristen, and she, who, wonderful lady, I'm sure, but, never married and didn't have children, weighed in on that whole topic. So I think, I don't know, they're implying some things. And I think maybe as they get more and more concerned or desperate about membership, you might see a new resurgence. And I will ask you this, Bill, before we take the call. What do you think the role is of this fascination or return to sort of a trad wife scenario that we see everywhere? I mean, I'm often on faithful sites just kind of seeing what, the faithful are saying. And there is this thought, that social media full of trad wives, you should be able to, that's traditional wife, for those of you that don't know, be able to stay home, milk your own goat, make your own cheese. I even saw a post on Faithful social media where some women were saying, I feel like to be modest, we should start wearing headscarves as LDS women. We should start covering our hair as LDS women. So sometimes there's a backlash that goes full circle, and orthodoxy and more of this conservative idea of the trad wife, for heaven's sakes, covering up your hair with a scarf. I mean, what do you think about that?
I just saw in the last couple of days, there was a news article that said for the first time ever, females are leaving religion faster than males are leaving religion.
Yeah, that's true. I did a whole podcast on that. It's absolutely true. And it's Gen Z that are doing it. Up until Gen Z, you've still got the men stepping away. Gen Z, no, women are exiting faster. And the article said a lot of it was, feeling an allyship to LGBTQ and those issues, and also just the patriarchy, just that, everywhere, well, like we talked about before, everywhere else in their lives, they're given autonomy, they're given respect. They have people working for them, and then they have to go to church and get off the stand. So they're not going to stand for it.
Yeah. And that's my point, that the brethren are in a precarious position. I think there is a strong impetus in lots of areas to go back to a form of orthodoxy. And you've seen that start. For instance, softening up the words of a disciplinary court. And then only a few years later, Elder Oaks comes out as RFM covered and says, well, that's not cutting it. We need to have more disciplinary courts. We need to have more excommunications. So you see the brethren sort of waffle back and forth, and they're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And what they don't realize is probably nothing works. And the best you can do is sort of plug the holes in the ship with your fingers, and some water still gets in. And they have to come up with what is the best route. And my hunch is what is not the best route would be to double down on women and go back to a rhetoric of shaming women to be at-home mothers, to not work outside the home, and to only worry about getting your basic needs taken care of. I think that would backfire, and I think they know it. So while you're right, there's a lot of impetus to double back down on old ideas and become orthodox, and in some ways they're doing that with other things. I don't think it would go well at all to do it here, especially in light of that data we just talked about, where women for the first time ever are leaving religion at a higher rate than men. It seems like they would just be pushing them right out the door. Okay, if nothing else, we've got our 3 phone calls. I'm going to suspend any new calls from coming in. The first call, I think, is someone by the name of Alita. Alita, are you there?
It's Elisa. It's
Elisa.
a tough name. No worries.
Gotcha. Okay, go ahead, Elisa. You're on Mormonism Live with Rebecca Bibliotheca and myself.
Well, I think just, 2 quick points. One, the church can soften their stance as much as they are, but it's not going to filter down to the local leaders. It never does. That kind of stuff takes, 40, 50 years for the leaders to stop, teaching the old ideas or using the old culture of the church to say, this is how we do it. Because if the brethren may be starting to say this now, but even if you look at the culture church, women, even in their roles in church, are expected to be mothering. They take care of the children. They're to serve in primary and young women. They create, they bring the treats for the ward activities. They take that role of mother within church. The church, the individual congregation is not going to allow that to change quick enough to stem the hemorrhaging that is happening in the church, especially with, more and more younger women turning away from organized religion. They're not going to stay as long as they're being pushed into this, traditional feminine role that doesn't work for them. And it's not them. It never was who women were.
Yeah, and I want to let you make your second point. I just want to say to that, I think it's intentional. I think the brethren love to allow an old teaching to still sit in the minds of members, for them to say it to each other on Sundays, but for them to be able to wash their hands of it at the very highest level of the church, knowing that the teaching will still permeate at the ward level for decades beyond. Yeah,
very true. Well, and then point number 2, you said you went looking in ex-Mormon Reddit to find women talking about these issues, about being pushed in these traditional female roles. You're not going to find them on ex-Mormon Reddit because ex-Mormon women had to create a separate space so they could talk amongst themselves about how patriarchal culture is so damaging. Because if you post that kind of stuff on regular ex-Mormon Reddit, the undeconstructed patriarchal ex-Mormon men will come in and just destroy you and destroy the conversation and refuse to engage.
Yeah.
And that's, the other half. Men need to just deconstruct this as well, not just women.
As a man, I'll say something here knowing that I'm sort of jumping in maybe when it isn't right. When I'm out with my friends who are all post-Mormons, there still seems to be this thing where men dominate the conversations and women often have to break off into smaller groups of just women talking for them to be able to carry the primary part of the conversation. So I think you made a great point that women, because patriarchy still exists outside the church, even when you leave it and you know that it was patriarchy that you left, women still have to create sort of private spaces to be able to work these things out in conversation.
Yeah. It's hard. It leaves you feeling even more frustrated because they don't want to listen.
Yeah.
And it's so hard. They don't listen in the church. They don't listen outside it. If you do try to engage in that conversation, 90% of the men are going to fall back to that patriarchy. But I will say this, there are signs of improvement. There was a post recent in the ex-Mormon women Reddit space of a woman celebrating the fact that she was able to engage in a positive conversation on the subreddit. And I just, I would encourage you, the men listening and the women listening, make yourself heard. Men, listen, because you're missing half of what happened in the.
I love that. Anthony Miller always said to be really cognizant that you're elevating marginalized voices, that you're not speaking for them, rather, as one who has privilege as a male, you step forward and say, hey, everybody, like, let's give so-and-so a moment. In other words, rather than say what you think, turn the time, be the person who sort of facilitates turning the time over to the female, the LGBT person, the person of color, and give them room to then share their perspective rather than all the mansplaining that I and every other man in this space that carries these conversations is certainly on some level doing.
Well, I think there's a lot of hope, a lot of positivity in the post-Mormon space. I feel like, I was a woman in the church for 5 decades. I definitely was put in a corner. I can tell you a million examples, literally having doors shut in my face and not allowed into where men were talking. So I experienced all of that. And then on the other side, interacting with so many amazing, of course, post-Mormon women, but also post-Mormon men that I podcast with or engage in scholarship with or talk with. And I have to say that I've never once felt not listened to. I have felt not listened to sometimes in comments and chats where there are faithful Mormon men that come in and kind of talk and they'll go right at you. It's interesting just to see, to me, the difference that post-Mormon men that I've interacted with definitely seem to be at least aware of the issue and try to do their best, even if it's not perfect. So it is interesting to watch the difference, but I've been really pleasantly surprised, and it makes me happy because we should all just be on an equal playing field. We should be able to share and things get done that way, right? Amazing things happen when we all just are on an even playing field.
Look at Landon trying to poke at you a little bit. What did she say?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He doesn't ever listen to me.
All right. Alyssa, thank you very much.
Just as long as let's have these conversations more and more and make sure that women's voices are being included and that you're not just shooting them down.
Yeah, 100%.
So thank you for this evening.
Yeah. Have a great day, Alyssa.
Yep, 100%.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. The next caller is Carolyn. Carolyn, are you on the line?
If you mean Maryland, I am.
Then Maryland it is. So folks, just so you know how this works, we have a program. It's a software program up in the cloud. People call in and there's a digital call screener. The caller, correct me if I'm wrong, but you call in and the system asks you to say your name. It asks you to say what it is that you're wanting to talk about. And then it transcribes that into some sort of text. And so then I'm just reading what it wrote, and it named you Carolyn, but you said it's Marilyn?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
Marilyn.
Go ahead,
And
Marilyn.
I figured that's why yeah, because it was digital. So I just wanted to talk about trying to pursue medicine as a Mormon woman in the 90s at BYU. At my pre-med interview, and I don't know if it still exists, there was a whole pre-medical office where they wrote the letters of recommendation that go out to medical schools. At one of my interviews, the guy asked me what right I thought I had going into medicine and taking away the job of a man. And my response to him was, so you would rather be seen by a less qualified man than by a woman? Is that what you're trying to tell me as a patient? That's what you would rather have? And then even once my husband and I, who was also in medical school, we weren't married when I started, but we were married by the time we started residency, my bishop said to us, well, it's great that you're both going to be doctors. Never mind, we both were already doctors, but who's going to take care of your daughter? Because we did have I think about an 18-month-old at the time. And I asked him, are you going to pay off med school loans? Because if you're going to pay them off, then I'll stay home. And he did not have a response to that. But it's always just been such a struggle in the Mormon world. And I've only encountered one other, and I can't really say that I'm fully in or out at this moment in time. But I've only encountered one other TBM Mormon female doctor, which is just so weird in this day and age of that would be about my age.
Yeah, that makes sense. If the teachings that we've shown tonight, even though the brethren stopped a decade or two ago from reiterating them, if those teachings still permeate at the local level because nothing's ever been corrected, then it sort of makes sense that you would see very few Mormon females, believing active Mormon females, in any sort of professional career that requires a lengthy education, maybe beyond sort of the 4-year degree. And that makes a lot of sense to me that would be one of the results of having teachings permeate without being corrected.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Marilyn.
And it's unfortunate because you're welcome.
Yeah.
I feel like there are, and I'm sorry if I'm going too long, and I can stop at any moment, that there are things that we get, and I'm sure, men appreciate this just as much from your career. There are those personal, goals that you have for yourself, that I contributed something today, I made someone's life better today, kind of self-esteem, personal goals, that it's hard to get that from just staying at home and being a stay-at-home mom. There were multiple days where going to work was a relief for me instead of, having been home with my small children during the day. And I have to think that it is because of this philosophy that we've had in our religion that we have the highest antidepressant use amongst women in the United States.
Yeah, and that is true. If Utah is not,
and you bring up a very good point in that, especially if you're working or trying to get a job as a woman in Utah, you will run into these kind of comments about who's going to watch your daughter. Even from, I remember getting my job, as I said, I returned back to work and I was asked the questions, well, what about your children? Are they, is someone going to, have you made arrangements? I'm guessing if it was a man applying for the job that I was applying for, they wouldn't have said, well, what about your children? Have you made arrangements? And I remember when I applied for my job at BYU after I got my master's, and the person who was interviewing me said, now, if we hire you, you're not going to get pregnant anytime soon, are you? I mean, the things that they would ask you, right, as a woman, it's just insane. But again,
right.
Cultural, and there's a learning curve there, and women just have to educate and say, you can't ask me that.
Yes, I mean, that's against the law to ask that question, first of all. And secondly, I have to think that the family medical leave was still in place, Rebecca, when you were on you should have had your maternity
Yeah,
leave.
nobody told me about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very unfortunate. It's difficult to go back to work
Yes.
4 days after a C-section. And I did it so I could hit the major holidays, and get the paycheck. Like if I go back today,
Wow.
then I can go to Thanksgiving. And if I go, it was kind of like that. I was kind of gaming it. But, there was absolutely no help or support telling me there might have been some other avenue. It was just like, oh yeah, nobody really does that. You had a baby? And I will say the individual people at my job and department were wonderful, but it was the institution that had nothing to offer me. The people were supportive and wonderful. The institution had nothing for me at that time.
That is really just amazing. And I'm sure that your doctor would not have encouraged you to go back to work 4 days after having
No, in fact, I ended up getting a major blood clot and having a huge problem. So as a doctor, you know what happens after a C-section, right? I had all those issues that impacted me for years. So yeah, it was very detrimental to my health, even life-threatening, that I went back too soon.
Wow.
Marilyn, I want to ask you something because somebody in the audience wrote a comment. I'm going to put it up on the screen. But they said, Marilyn, how are you treated as a woman in the profession versus a woman at church? And I can't, my hunch is that sort of, how do other men treat you as a female doctor versus how other men treat you as a female doctor Mormon in the ward? Any thoughts there you'd want to share?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as a female doctor at work, I am treated as an equal. I will say there have been some men in like administrative positions who I'm fairly certain are LDS who have. I was sitting with a group of colleagues one day at a meeting where, and one of the administrators walked up and said to me, and these were a bunch of very respected physicians that I was sitting with, these older physicians, these older men. And he said, so Marilyn, are these guys taking care of you? And I was just irate. And so I said to him, yeah, I run a tight ship. And my colleague next to me like spewed on the floor. He was laughing so hard. But so, I mean, I would say my colleagues, my male colleagues treat me like an equal, which is fantastic. And actually in the ward in which I lived, it's not been too bad, but certainly in other wards that I have been in the past, I was always they would try to give me lots of callings like they would give to the wives of the other doctors. And I was like, no, treat me like one of the men. I am not the wife of a doctor. I am a doctor. So treat me like that. Or yeah, they talk to my husband instead of talking to me. And I'm like, no, I know more about this than he does. This is not his specialty. It's my specialty. Talk to me. And it's oh my gosh, as soon as you start pulling at that little patriarchy string that hangs down from Mormonism, it's amazing how fast that whole thing unravels.
Great.
Thank you for answering that. Appreciate it.
That's great.
Have a great day, and thank you for calling, Marilyn.
You're welcome. Thank you as well. Bye-bye.
All right, and the final call of the night, I believe, might be the name CM, but at this point, I hate to even guess. CM? Is that perfect?
Yep. Hi,
ahead.
Bill. Hi, Rebecca.
You're on Mormonism Live.
Yeah. I'll try to make it quick. So I just want to kind of touch on the emotions that come with all of this. Because I feel like so much of the human experience is denied to us as women because of the teachings of the church and because so much is decided for us. I think the thing that bothers me the most is that we're seen as wife appliances or utilities or chattel or accessories, but it is almost impossible in ward council or any place else in the church to be seen as a person, and it makes me filled with rage. And I wanted to say that it makes sense that I'm angry. It makes sense that we're angry. Myself and Rebecca and other women should not have to go through childbirth and C-sections and miscarriages and stillbirths and be expected to go on like nothing happened and be happy and pleasant about it and go on with our life without support. And it makes sense that we're like flooded with all these things because it matches the situation, and it's signaling that we were wrong and we deserve better, because it is an injustice to be made to live a life chosen for you, especially when it's like so harmful to your mental and physical health, you know?
I have a female friend who, I think I've shared this on the podcast before, but she wanted to be a doctor and it was her dream. And she gets to be, I don't know, 12 years old, 13 years old. She enters into the young women's and she is clearly explained to her what her role is. And she just sort of goes in her head. She goes, I have to give up my dreams. I have to be what God wants me to be. And so she gives up her dreams.
Yep.
And it wasn't an easy thing. She, to this day, has a lot of hurt about this religion, which turned out for her to not be true. And her entire life went down an entirely different path than the dream she had. She was an A student. She was bright, intelligent, she went to BYU. She would have easily, I think, accomplished whatever it was she wanted to do. And it was all sort of taken from her. And then to learn that this thing wasn't what it claimed to be, that sort of gives you the power then to go back and then to question all of the moves you made that this thing manipulated you and pressured you to make.
Yep, absolutely.
I used to have a young women's advisor. I think I was a MIME aide, and she would end every lesson and she would say, and then you'll be married. That was it. No matter what topic, whatever she was talking about, whatever advice she was giving, it was always, and then girls, then you'll be married. Like, that's the hard stop right there, you know? But then I was thinking, if you think about the trajectory of women in the church, we really don't know. I mean, I know a lot of faithful women gravitate toward the idea of mother in heaven. Well, that's a mother. That's a wife. That's a nurturer. That is the only kind of inkling or hint of a trajectory that women have. And so no wonder they try to bind you so closely to that, because that is your role here. That will be your role there in their perspective. And they can't see or allow anything else. So, and then you'll be married, mother in heaven.
And I'll let you go here, CM. Thank you very much. But Rebecca, you're 100% right in that Mormonism theology almost entirely stops at that moment.
There's nothing else.
You have kids, you raise them to be productive saints in the church for the future. And then next thing the only thing you really get after that is that you'll be making more spirit children in the life hereafter.
And you'll be a multiple wife. Yeah. And I've had so many people of my age say, I had a purpose while I was a mother and I'm doing my job. I'm raising the kids, but now I'm in my 40s or my 50s. I'm obsolete. I'm disappearing at church. I'm not even listened to at church. I have no role. There's no such thing as being an elder in the tribe, right? As a woman in the church. That doesn't exist. There's no role for somebody of my age or older and their wisdom. There's no role there. I will say, I feel like there's a role in the post and nuanced Mormon world, because like I said, the people I get to collaborate with and talk to, and people who actually listen to me or to any of us, it's wonderful. There's so much to be learned from all women of all ages, but it is interesting how obsolete and invisible you become when you're no longer performing that role as a mother, especially if you didn't do it quite right. If your kids didn't stay in and you're having those issues, then you just kind of fade away. You know, you can't even hold your head up. So it's a real phenomenon.
Yeah. I would only finish, and I'd love to hear if you have any finishing thoughts, or if you want that to be it, that's fine too. My 2 cents to everyone out there. For the believer, you're going to see me as the critic, and you're going to see me as the anti-Mormon, the person who's just trying to tear your faith down. But what I would say is that Mormonism has changed on everything. So to trust these men as knowing for sure what it is, what it looks like, how you should be, there's zero reason to place that kind of trust in them. And on issues like this, they are saying, trust us, do things the way we say. And my fear is on lots of issues like this one, that you'll be older and you will regret and resent that you allowed these 15 old men to convince you that they are prophets, seers, and revelators, and to direct your life in such a way that you have deep regrets as life goes on. And so whether you see me as a critic or not, I'd simply say, like, hold the judgment on that for a later day and just sit with how much has changed, and sit with what is your inner gut. Forget what I'm telling you. What is your conscience? What is your inner authority? What is your inner voice telling you about how you should live your life in order to be the best version of you and to find as much joy and contentment in life as possible? And go with that. And that will be far less likely to lead you astray than 15 old men who have changed on everything. Rebecca?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I would say, we've talked a lot about, especially from my perspective or women's perspective, regret or unrealized dreams. I think someone in the chat said it wasn't that your dreams were crushed. You just never realized that you were even allowed to have different dreams. And I think that's what it is. And you get on the other side of it. And it depends. I admit I'm jealous when I see women in their 20s or 30s stepping away, because I think, oh my gosh, you have a whole life that you could do all kinds of things. And then, I talk to women that are more my age, and you lament for what could have been, what was. You still loved your life. You loved your kids and everything, but there could have been another way. So I think my message is just that it's never too late to reinvent yourself and find your power or exercise your power. There's a lot of really amazing opportunities. There's a lot of people that want to hear what you have to say. And I think that it's never too late. And the opportunities are wide and vast. If you're like me, more on the post-Mormon space, and you stepped away, there's no little voice you have to listen to except for your own. And there's a lot that you can still accomplish and that you can do. So I'm not saying there aren't rough days and you don't look back and go, what could have been, but there's a lot to come, and you all have this power, and you know what? Go for it.
Yeah. Just a reminder, folks, send RFM. You can go on Facebook to the Radio Free Mormon page, and you can send him a message there. Just wish him well, and hope you recover quickly. RFM, we missed you tonight. And Rebecca, thank you so much for filling in. It was really nice to have your life experience to go along with these quotes. It means a lot to me that late notice you took the opportunity to come on, and I just want to say thank you for doing that.
I feel like any woman in the chat could have stepped in right here. I feel like any woman who was raised in the church would have had similar experiences. So, and RFM just texted me and said he wants to let everybody know that he did buy me dinner when I visited him in Seattle over the weekend. So yes, he is that magnanimous, wonderful person. We all know that he is much, much, much shorter in person, like literally hardly over 4 feet tall.
Yeah. And do you want to tell people what do you have going on Mormonish next, or what's
Yeah, I would promote, first of all, tomorrow, unfortunately, which will be nighttime in the UK, is the day that Nemo is facing his disciplinary council. And I've been asked with others, I think, are you doing this, Bill? Yeah, exactly. Tomorrow to live stream with John, starting, I think, midday, like around noonish or 12:30, I think we're going to do it. And so look for that. I'm sure we'll be posting that on all of our sites, because we definitely want to show support and be there for Nemo in this really, really unfortunate day. Because, I think he's a little shook. Maybe some of the rest of us are like, why would you be? But some people are, and we have to, respect that. And we want to be there for him for sure. As far as what we're putting out on Mormonish, we always have an episode on Fridays coming up at 11. I'm not sure yet what I'm putting out. I have something in the works that could be pretty big, but I don't know if it's going to happen before Friday, but we're going to have something amazing for you. So that's Friday at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. What about you, Bill? What's coming up?
Sweet. Depending on how RFM feels, I think we're aiming for a Mormonism After Dark on Friday, but that may have to be postponed. Otherwise, we'll revisit with you, of course, tomorrow with the Nemo thing, but we'll revisit with you on Monday for the next episode of the Mormon Newscast, which is at 6 p.m., both on the Mormonish as well as Mormon Discussion YouTube channels. Otherwise, folks, we'll see you here next week on Mormonism Live, 6:20 p.m. Mountain Time every week. And again, Rebecca, thank you. And audience, thank you so much. And callers, thank you for calling in and sharing your personal experience as well. Have a great night, everybody, and see you soon.
Bye-bye.